We also see claims that the prosecution is basically trying to manage the case in the media instead of just focusing on what's happening in the courtroom. This brings up concerns about whether public opinion is being unfairly influenced outside the legal process.
Which makes you wonder about bias and whether public opinion could actually end up affecting the outcome of the trial.
Exactly. And lastly, on this point, people are raising concerns about how the defense has been given a limited amount of time to present their testimony. As we mentioned before, this is a big sticking point. Some people argue that this restriction is unfair and prevents Netanyahu from fully defending himself.
It all comes down to whether the defense feels like they're really getting a fair chance to be heard and to challenge the accusations against the prime minister.
Right. Now let's dive into the experiences shared by David Sharan, who is an advisor to Netanyahu. His account is really eye-opening. He describes the investigation as humiliating.
Yeah, and what's striking is how detailed he is about the tactics used during the investigation. He talks about being fingerprinted, held for hours, and even physically searched, even though he wasn't suspected of anything violent or having drugs or trying to obstruct justice.
And his claims about being pressured psychologically during questioning are pretty disturbing, too. He says the investigators told him his life would be finished and erased if he didn't cooperate. He even claims that they presented him with a fake version of events, like they were trying to manipulate his memory.
That's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It definitely raises some serious questions about the methods they used during those interrogations.
Yeah, it does. And his story goes even deeper than that. He talks about how they brought his family into it, too. He says his elderly mother was questioned and her bank accounts were closed. He even describes this really upsetting incident where they brought his wife to the interrogation facility, apparently to try to put pressure on him. He says they made it sound like he was putting his family in danger.
Wow. If these claims are true, it really paints a dark picture of the investigation and raises some serious ethical concerns about how they treated the people involved and their families.
It really does. Sharan also claims that the investigators tried to get him to become a state witness, telling him it would be better for his life, that otherwise his life would be finished and erased, and that his future job prospects might be limited to working at a supermarket.
So they were basically trying to persuade him to turn against the prime minister by offering him a way out of legal trouble.
Exactly. Okay, now let's zoom out a bit and consider the bigger picture here. The broader context of this whole trial and what it might mean in the long run. Because MK Amit Halevi argues that this is all part of a bigger issue, that Israeli democracy has been under attack for years, and he points to the recent debates about reforming the judicial system. He sees this trial against the prime minister as a key part of that fight.
So for him, this isn't just a legal case, it's part of a power struggle between different parts of the government.
Exactly. And some people are even saying that no matter how this trial turns out, it's already done a lot of damage to public trust in the legal system.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That idea that the justice system is fair and impartial is so important for people to have confidence in it. If they start to think the trial is politically motivated or unfair, it can have a lasting impact, even if the final verdict goes one way or another.
Definitely. And the fact that this trial is happening in the middle of a war raises some important questions about what the country's priorities should be. Like we talked about before, MK Amit Halevi thinks it's crazy that the prime minister has to be in court all the time during such a critical period. He's questioning what the focus should be right now. MK Yulia Malinovsky, though, seems to downplay this concern. In the title of her YouTube video, she says that war is a given. But then you have others, like MK Vanek Movitsky, who question why they're focusing on what he calls nonsense in court when the country is facing such huge security threat.
It really highlights how challenging it is to balance this ongoing legal process with the immediate demands of keeping the country safe, especially during a war.
It makes you wonder if it's even realistic for a prime minister to be so deeply involved in a trial like this while also trying to lead the country through a crisis.
Right.
There's also this brief mention of a proposal by Trump regarding Gaza, although we don't have many details about it in these sources. And it's not entirely clear how it relates to the trial. It seems to be mentioned more as part of the bigger international picture surrounding all.
So it's another factor in the complex geopolitical situation that's playing out in the background of this whole trial.
Right. And then there's the hostage situation that's going on, which is mentioned as a really critical factor in everything that's happening politically and legally. I mean, the safety of those hostages and trying to get them released is obviously a huge concern for everyone in Israel, right?
Absolutely. It just adds another layer of complexity and emotion to the whole discussion about the prime minister and his ability to lead during such a difficult time.
Yeah. So after diving into all this information you've shared, it's clear how complicated and sensitive this situation with Prime Minister Netanyahu's trial really is. We've seen these passionate debates about whether the trial is fair, what it's really focusing on, and we've heard some pretty serious criticisms of the judicial system as a whole.
And the story from the Prime Minister's advisor is really troubling, too. It raises a lot of questions about the methods that were used during the investigation.
For sure. In the end, all these sources highlight how divided people are on this issue and raise some fundamental questions about how power is balanced in a democracy, about the role of the media, and about how well the justice system works in Israel, especially when it's under so much pressure during a national crisis.
It leaves us, the listeners, with some really important things to think about, like how does a trial like this affect people's trust in their institution? What happens when a high-profile trial like this takes place during a time when the country is dealing with serious threat? And what could the long-term consequences be for Israeli democracy, regardless of how this trial ends? These are some really big questions, and the information we've gone over today gives us a good starting point for thinking about them. As always, we're going super deep into a very specific set of sources that you, the learner, have provided for us.
Absolutely.
And this time it is about the recent developments in Prime Minister Netanyahu's trial. So this is something we've touched on in the past, just giving kind of like the broad outlines of what's been happening.
Sure.
But now we're really zeroing in on some of the details. And you've given us quite a range of sources here, everything from like mainstream outlets that we've seen before, like Jerusalem Post, Ynet, Mako, Israel Hayom.
Right.
But then we've also got some more like niche things like Eli Topori's blog and even Telecom News.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that one.
Yeah.
And then you've got, a full video interview with Dory Schwartz, who's, a criminal and family law attorney.
Yeah, so like all these different angles coming in and kind of painting this picture for us. And I guess, what we really want to do today is kind of like distill all that down into what's really important here. Like, what are the things that are actually going to move this case forward?
Yeah, I think that's the goal.
Are there any like game changers in here and so on?
Exactly. And, it's interesting because these sources primarily cover mid-March through early April 2025. So it's a really tight time frame, which helps us really zoom in on the key moments in the trial. Netanyahu's testimony, some of the legal back and forth, and of course the whole Qatar Gate thing that's emerged.
Right. Yeah. Now that was definitely like a surprise twist. I don't think anybody was really expecting.
No.
So so I guess the first thing that really jumped out at me, and this is from the interview with attorney Dory Schwartz, is that he has a pretty strong opinion about this whole trial right from the get-go.
Oh, he doesn't pull any punches. He calls it a show trial. Straight out, or as he puts it in Hebrew, mishpat ra'ava, which, carries a much stronger connotation.
Yeah, it's got the kind of like vengeful feeling, almost like a witch hunt kind of vibe.
Exactly. And he's very critical of the judges. Specifically, he says they're using procedural tactics to basically put Netanyahu at a disadvantage. He makes the point that Netanyahu isn't being treated like your average defendant.
Right.
He brings up all these obstacles with scheduling postponements, things that Schwartz believes are interfering with Netanyahu's ability to actually do his job as prime minister.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? Because it does raise the question of like, okay, if you're the head of state and you're in the middle of this very intense trial, how do you balance those two things?
Exactly.
Is it even possible to do both effectively?
Yeah, is justice even possible in that scenario?
Right.
It's a real dilemma.
Yeah, and Schwartz doesn't stop there. I mean, he also suggests that this whole trial might actually end up benefiting Netanyahu.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really intriguing, right? Because on the surface, it seems like, this is the worst possible situation for Netanyahu to be in, but Schwartz presents a different perspective.
So what's his logic there?
He argues that the trial is giving Netanyahu this unique platform to expose what he claims are these deep-seated corrupt connections between the media, the prosecution, and the...
Ooh. Okay, so he's saying Netanyahu's using this as an opportunity to kind of fight back.
Exactly. And Schwartz even goes so far as to speculate that Netanyahu is intentionally dragging the trial out to really shine a light on these alleged connections.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like a calculated strategy.
Right. And he says this has taken a lot of people by surprise. Many were expecting a quick plea deal. Netanyahu may be retiring from politics, but Schwartz sees it differently.
That's a big gamble, though, if that's what's actually happening.
Huge gamble. But Schwartz clearly admires Netanyahu's tenacity. He talks about his resilience, and he expresses hope that Netanyahu has the strength to see this through to the very end.
It sounds like he believes Netanyahu can come out on top and expose some serious wrongdoing in the process.
That's definitely the impression I get.
So now let's shift gears a bit and talk about that whole Qatar Gate situation, because that seems to have really thrown a wrench into the works.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about a plot twist.
Right out of nowhere.
And the timing of it all was just so bizarre. I mean, the 20th day of Netanyahu's testimony ends abruptly, hours earlier than expected.
Right.
And it's all happening right as these reports about Qatargate are starting to surface.
Yeah, and then immediately after that, the defense team requests a closed-door session.
Makes you wonder what they're trying to keep under wraps.
I know, right? Like, is there some kind of connection there that we're not seeing, or is it just a coincidence?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely suspicious.
And to make things even more complicated, you've got these arrests happening at the same time.
Oh, yeah. We can't forget about those two individuals very close to Netanyahu. Jonathan Urich, his media advisor.
Right.
And then Eli Feldstein, an aide who's been linked to a classified documents leak in the past. They're both arrested in connection with the Qatar.
Yeah, and it's not like these guys are just random figures either. They both have histories that tie them to Qatar in some way.
Yeah, Urich had been investigated for alleged improper relationships with Qatari officials and Feldstein for that whole business, with the classified documents supposedly ending up in Qatar.
So the question is, how does all of this tie into Netanyahu's trial?
Right. Is it all just one big coincidence, or is there something more going on?
Well, when Netanyahu was asked about Qatargate directly, he didn't seem too fake.
No, he just brushed it off as a bluff, or, as he said in Hebrew, huckled.
So he's basically trying to distance himself from the whole thing.
Seems that way, but it's going to be tough to completely ignore those arrests. I mean, these are people in his inner circle.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the specifics of Netanyahu's testimony now, because there were definitely some key points that came up.
Oh, for sure. This is where it gets really juicy.
Yeah, he definitely didn't hold back in his accusations, especially when it came to the prosecution.
No, he went right for the jugular. He accused them of straight up skewing the elections, specifically calling out the 2019 election.
Wow.
And he didn't stop there. He also accused them of hiding evidence that could clear his name while at the same time making up a case against him.
So he's saying they're playing dirty.
That's exactly what he's saying.
Yeah, and those are some pretty serious accusations.
Yeah.
I mean, if true, it would completely undermine the integrity of the whole trial.
No question about it.
He also addressed the bribery charges head on, specifically those related to his relationship with Shaul Elovitch.
Right, the owner of Walla and Bizek.
Yeah, that's a major part of the prosecution's case.
And Netanyahu's response was pretty emphatic. He said, quote, "I have no bribery understanding, it's an invention." Or, in Hebrew, Ein li havana shochadit hamsa.
So he's completely denying any quid pro quo.
Exactly. He argues that if there was a bribery agreement in place, why would he have told his associate Groner to investigate complaints related to the Zek?
That's an interesting point.
It is, and he even goes further to say that it's absurd to think Groner, who he calls his personal representative, wouldn't have just automatically supported Bezek if there was some kind of deal in the background.
So he's basically saying, look at the actions, not just the words.
Exactly.
Okay, so then there's the whole issue of Walla and whether or not they were giving Netanyahu favorable coverage.
Right, because the prosecution's argument is that this favorable coverage was part of the bribery deal.
Yeah, and Netanyahu challenges this pretty directly.
He does. He argues that despite what the prosecution says, Walla often published negative stories about him.
Really?
Yeah, and he even gives this kind of funny example about the former editor-in-chief not liking his dog's name.
Okay, well, that's definitely not something you hear every day in a courtroom.
No, it's not, but it makes his point.
Yeah, yes, so.
And he also makes the argument that standard press releases that get sent to all media outlets sometimes weren't published by Walla, so how can that be seen as corruption?
Right, good point.
And he brings up another interesting comparison. He points out that Yainet published a Facebook post and nobody batted an eye, but when Walla covered the same post, suddenly it's considered corruption.
So he's basically calling out a double standard.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't forget about the whole family involvement angle.
Oh yeah, that was a big one.
So what did Netanyahu have to say about that?
Well, he admitted that his wife Sarah and his son Yair may have contacted Ziaf Rubinstein about making changes to Walla's coverage.
So he's not denying their involvement.
No, but he's careful to say that he wasn't aware of the full extent of what they were doing. And he very specifically denies making any indirect request to either Elovitch or Ilan Yeshua, who was the CEO of Walla at the time.
So he's trying to create some separation between himself and his family's action.
That seems to be the strategy there.
Okay, so then there's that infamous follow-up call with Shlomo Filber, which has been a key piece of evidence for the prosecution.
Oh, yeah, that one's been all over the news. Filber was the Director General of the Communications Ministry, and he's a state witness.
Right, so his testimony carries a lot of weight.
Absolutely. And the prosecution's argument is that this call was Netanyahu instructing Filber to do favors for Elovitch.
Right.
But Netanyahu denies that completely. He says the call was actually about clarifying a false article that had been published in Globe about canceling the structural separation within Bezek.